Hello everyone, this is Mr. Simone. This is my review video for the economic conditions during the Gilded Age. I'm making a brand new one because the last one was filled with Astros talk, and since they did not win last night, I didn't think that would be appropriate. Okay, so what is the Gilded Age? When is the Gilded Age? The Gilded Age is a time period in the late 1800s in American history, and the term was used by Mark Twain, and what he was describing is this increasing gap between the rich and the poor. On the surface, it appeared that America was a very rich country, but underneath there was tremendous poverty. So this Gilded Age term is one that people are actually using to describe the most recent time period, the last several decades in American history as well. So what are the overall big themes economically for the Gilded Age? This is a time when we are industrializing as a nation. One of the big components of that industrialization is the growth of the railroads. You're also going to see an age of inventions during this time period. People like Alexander Graham Bell and Thomas Edison. You're going to see the growth of monopolies, large businesses that developed and destroyed competition and took over most of the business in the industry. These businessmen will include Carnegie and Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan, Cornelius Vanderbilt. The government's policy during this time was laissez-faire, the French phrase that refers to hands-off. So there was very minimal, if any, regulation of business during this time. The response of many of the workers was to form labor unions during the Gilded Age. There's also going to be like an increase in immigration to America during the late 1800s. That's going to lead to the rise of cities and urbanization. That brings both good and bad elements as well. And people are going to be moving out west during the Gilded Age. There's a law called a bill called the Homestead Act that gave people free land if they were willing to move out for 5 years and settle and farm the land. And this development of the farming population will lead to the rise of a political party called the Populist Party. So that's like just a big overview. If you were doing a contextualization paragraph, this would be a wonderful way to summarize the late 1800s. So now we'll go through a few of these in more detail. This industrial era is defined by the steel industry and the oil industry, new machinery, and you will even see the beginning of electrical power during this. But remember, it's all after the Civil War. The early industrialization that took place before the Civil War was really like a change in making goods from the home and now making them in our early factories. The railroads, so often I think people just don't understand or appreciate the significance of the railroads. Our first transcontinental railroad was done in 1869. They put the golden spike in the ground at Promontory Point, Utah, connecting the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific rail lines. We had 4 of them done I think by 1900. And the railroads actually is what contributed to our time zones, because we needed to be able to coordinate the delivery of goods from one part of the country to another. All right. I told you this is the age of inventions as well. Some inventions like the cash register and the Kodak camera and the safety razor by Gillette. We had an adding machine, but the 2 major inventors of this time will be Alexander Graham Bell and his telephone, and then Thomas Edison. Edison had his own company in Menlo Park, New Jersey. He gets credit for inventing the incandescent light bulb, but there is a story that one of his workers, Lewis Latimer, may have contributed to it as much, if not more. Lewis Latimer was African American, so some people think that there was an issue regarding the ability to get a patent at the time. All right, monopolies. So this is when you have total or near total control of an industry. The only reason why monopolies were able to form is because our philosophy was laissez-faire. Capitalism. This all originates with the book The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith in 1776. And then there was this guiding principle of social Darwinism. So those of you who remember in science that you learned about Darwinism, which is the survival of the fittest. So people now use that phrase to describe the fact that people said if you were willing to work harder or you were willing to rise above, that's why certain people were able to get so much wealth at the top of the ladder. And some of these people are right here. So you have Andrew Carnegie here. He made his money in the steel industry, and Rockefeller made his money in the oil industry. J.P. Morgan was banking, but J.P. Morgan also purchased Carnegie's U.S. Steel Corporation. And Cornelius Vanderbilt was mostly in the railroads. So the big debate is, are these men captains of industry? Should they be, idolized for their ability to develop such incredible fortunes during this time? Or were they the right place at the right time? Or did they use ruthless tactics to run other people out of business? So some people might call them robber barons. That's a decision for you to think about and ponder, but just please be aware that they did not violate or break any laws. There were very few, if any, laws to be broken at this time. Government was certainly on the side of big business during the late 1800s. So workers had to respond to this, and one of the ways they did was to form labor unions. And we're going to go over all of this in class, obviously, but you will see some instances of labor strife. So there was this massive railroad strike in 1877, and there's going to be this large union called the Knights of Labor, which basically included all workers. And they were protesting once in Chicago. It was in Haymarket Square. And while they were protesting for an 8-hour workday and better conditions and better pay, somebody threw a bomb in the crowd. Now, we don't know who that was, but several police officers were killed, and this became known as the Haymarket Riot. A lot of people think that it was not the Knights of Labor, but rather a group of people who were anarchists, who believed in no government, who may have caused this riot. But it really led to the end of the Knights of Labor. The American Federation of Labor will be another labor union that forms later on, but that union really focused on individual crafts, individual skills, rather than just lumping everybody together. Carnegie's company was engaged in the Homestead strike, which did not make him happy at all. Workers, again, were being replaced by scabs, who were replacement workers, and tensions mounted, and that led to unrest as well. But I would say the best strike for you to know is the Pullman strike. So the Pullman strike took place in 1894. George Pullman was an inventor of a railroad car that people could sleep on overnight. But he also created a town for his workers to live in. So now you have this man who's a railroad tycoon, but he also is housing his workers. And 1 year before this strike, there was a terrible economic panic that hit the country. So as a result of that, Pullman decides to lower the wages of his workers, but he kept their rent the same. So that led to the union leader, his name is Eugene V. Debs, to organize this strike. And the strike did get violent, and the strike led to about 60% of the rail traffic being shut down in America. So they actually went to the government to get an injunction to stop the strike. And the argument they used was that the railroad was interfering with the transit of the mail. So this was a federal offense. And the president, who was Grover Cleveland, actually supported the decision to end this strike. So it just shows how the government was on the side of big business at the time. All right. Urbanization and immigration, as I said to you earlier, you're going to see the rise of cities during this time, but the conditions were not always pleasant. So you have very, very poor living conditions, unsanitary conditions during this time. Immigrants moving to the city, living in areas we called ghettos, in other words, ethnic communities of people with the same background. And it really does define the late 1800s. It won't be until the early 1900s where reformers are trying to improve those conditions. And then lastly, you're going to see the rise of a political party called the Populist Party. So now what is the Populist Party focused on? It's primarily the rights of farmers and workers. So as I'll explain in more detail in class, farmers and workers feel as if that the government, neither party, the Democrats or the Republicans, are on their side. So they form these early groups called the Grange, and that will eventually materialize into the Populist Party. The Populist Party comes up with an entire platform, and the platform consists of certain calls for, like an 8-hour workday, a graduated income tax, which would charge a higher rate for the rich. They want to have more power in the democratic process, so they call for like what's called recall, a referendum. Again, I'll go through all of this in class, but one of their big platform ideas was they want to print more money. Farmers and workers were in tremendous debt, and they think that if the government prints more money, it will help them to get out of debt. But we couldn't print money back then unless it was backed up with gold. So one of the things that they call for is, well, why don't we also print money that's backed up with silver? So they call for this free coinage of silver. And one of the leaders of that is this guy, William Jennings Bryan, 36 years old when he's running for president in 1896. I should have put a better image here. But he gives this famous speech called the Cross of Gold speech, saying, "You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold." So he wants to add silver to the currency. And I will just give you a sneak preview of this, but the book, The Wizard of Oz, which some of you may have heard of, is written, by many people's account, as an allegory to represent everything that I just kind of went through in this video. And if you just want, again, the little sneak preview to this, the yellow brick road is supposed to represent the gold standard, which was a dangerous road for people to walk on in the book, and it was a dangerous standard for us to adhere to economically. So this is just an overview. You have notes on the Google Doc, and you have obviously whatever we do in class to help you in addition to what you might read on your own in the textbook. And I did, I think, a great job of avoiding any talk about the Astros. Those of you who are not baseball fans, I appreciate you at least listening to all the kids making fun of me as they all root for the Astros to lose. All right, have a great day, and I will see you at some point in class.